There is a specific weight to a Tonka truck manufactured in Mound, Minnesota. Pick one up, a real one, a 1965 Mighty Dump made from cold-rolled steel and powder-coated in that particular shade of industrial yellow, and you will feel it immediately. 1 kilogram and 110 grams. Not the weight of a toy. The weight of something that was never designed to be treated as one. That weight meant everything. Not as a metaphor. As a literal, physical fact. It meant that when a 5-year-old buried that truck in a sandbox in 1968, left it outside through a Minnesota January where temperatures dropped to minus 22 degrees Celsius, and dug it up the following April, the dump bed still rotated, the wheels still turned, and the axles held. The truck did not break because it was not built to break. It was built the way a wrench is built, the way a C-clamp is built, the way a ball-peen hammer is built. It was built to outlast any reasonable use, and most unreasonable uses too. At its peak in 1970, the Tonka factory in Mound, Minnesota employed 900 workers running 2 full shifts across 4 connected buildings on 18 acres. They produced 43 different truck models and generated $47 million in annual revenue, roughly $365 million in today's money. The factory was not just an employer. It was the entire economic and social architecture of a small town. If you lived in Mound, you worked at Tonka or you worked for someone who did. 23 years after that peak, the factory went silent. Not because of a fire. Not because of a recession. Not because the product failed. The Mound factory closed in October 1993 because the company that had acquired Tonka 2 years earlier had no intention of keeping it open. 900 skilled manufacturing workers, men and women who had spent careers learning the precise tolerances of steel pressing and powder coating and hand assembly, received 2 weeks of severance pay for every year of service and were told to find something else. The last truck off the Mound production line was a Mighty Dump, serial number 47,283,117. It was assembled by a woman named Ruth Helverson who had worked at Tonka for 31 years. The truck was photographed for a local newspaper, packed into a cardboard box, and shipped to Hasbro headquarters in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. No records indicate it was ever displayed. It was put in a warehouse and that was that. The trucks that replaced it appeared in stores in January 1994. They were manufactured in Dongguan, China. They weighed 170 grams. They were plastic. They broke. This is not a story about corporate greed, though greed was present. It is not a story about globalization, though globalization was the mechanism. It is not even entirely a story about Tonka, though Tonka is the product of its success. It is a story about a company that built something so good that the goodness became irrelevant. About workers who spent their careers perfecting a craft that the market had quietly decided it no longer needed. About the specific American tragedy of succeeding completely at the wrong thing at the wrong time. The trucks that came out of Mound were not better than their replacements by any metric the market was measuring in 1993. They were only better in every way that mattered. Lynn Baker was not an entrepreneur. He was a schoolteacher, and that distinction is important. Baker was born in Minneapolis in 1907, the son of a railroad mechanic who held a very specific philosophy about objects. If something was worth building, it was worth building correctly. If something was worth buying, it was worth building once. Baker grew up in a household where broken things were a criticism of the craftsman, not an inconvenience to be replaced. You fixed things. You built the next version better. The idea of discarding something was not accepted. By 1946, Baker was teaching school in Mound, Minnesota, earning $2,100 a year. He had a workshop in his garage where he built furniture in the evenings to supplement his teacher's salary. He also had 2 sons who played with toys the way boys do, with violence and imagination and no apparent regard for the structural limitations of objects. Every Christmas, the same sequence of events. A new toy, a week of play, a broken toy, a crying child, Baker in the garage trying to repair something that was never designed to be repaired. This was not an unusual experience for any American father of that era. The toy industry of the 1940s operated on a philosophy. Toys were manufactured cheaply, sold at low margins, and replaced frequently. Tin toys cut children's hands. Wooden toys splintered. Die-cast metal toys bent at the joints. The industry accepted breakage not as a failure but as a feature. Broken toys became replacement sales. Baker found this morally offensive in a way that went beyond consumer frustration. That autumn at a parent-teacher meeting he encountered two men who shared his exact complaint. Avery Crounce ran a tool and die shop with contracts for agricultural machinery manufacturers. Al Tesh was a precision machinist who had spent the war years building aircraft components and had developed an almost pathological intolerance for tolerance failures. The three of them spent an afternoon complaining, not about the cost or the aesthetics of toys, but about their structural integrity. They were men who understood load specifications and failure points, and they watched the toy industry produce objects that failed under loads no reasonable child could avoid. They started meeting on weekends in Tesh's workshop. The first thing they built was not intended to be sold. It was a proof of concept, a prototype metal crane designed to answer a single question. What would a toy look like if the same engineering standards used in agricultural machinery manufacturing were applied to it? They tested it by having their children throw it downstairs, drag it across gravel, run bicycles over it, and leave it in standing water for 2 weeks. Then they retrieved it, examined every stress point, and rebuilt the parts that had shown weakness. The crane did not break. In 1947, the three men incorporated as Mound Metalcraft and moved into the basement of a former schoolhouse. Their combined initial capital was $2,600, roughly $34,000 today. They rented the basement for $60 a month and bought a used hydraulic press from an agricultural machinery manufacturer for $350. Their first product was a steam shovel with a functional pressed steel bucket painted in industrial yellow. They made 37 units and sold them all before Christmas at $4.95 each, twice what a wooden toy truck cost. Parents paid without hesitation. By 1955, Mound Metalcraft had grown to produce 52 distinct models and changed its name to Tonka Toys, drawing from the Dakota word for great, the same word found in the name of Lake Minnetonka a few miles from the factory. By then they had also established the philosophy that would define and ultimately doom them for the following 4 decades. If a specification could be reinforced, it would be reinforced. If a material could be made thicker, it would be made thicker. If there was any doubt about whether a component would survive real-world child use, the answer was always to overbuild. That was not a slogan. It was an engineering posture. And for a long time it was entirely correct. The steel used in a Mound-era Tonka truck was not toy-grade steel. No such category existed. It was the same gauge used for tractor fenders and agricultural equipment panels, specified by Tesh through his industrial contracts. It was 40% heavier than the equivalent material used by their nearest competitor. It cost more per unit to purchase, more per unit to press and form, more per unit to ship because the finished product was heavier. Tonka passed every one of those costs directly to the retail price and then argued that the premium was justified. They were right, which is important to note because being right can be a dangerous position. The product that defined everything arrived in 1964. The Mighty Dump, a 45-centimeter dump truck with a spring-loaded crank mechanism that raised the truck bed to a 60-degree angle, held it there, and released it smoothly without slamming down. The mechanism was adapted from Caterpillar construction equipment, scaled down and redesigned for child use. It required 11 separate metal components, each assembled by hand at the factory. No plastic parts. No press-fit connections. Every fastener torqued to specification. The development process for the Mighty Dump took 14 months. Baker insisted on field testing with real children in real backyards, not controlled laboratory environments. He distributed prototypes to Mound families and asked them to let children play normally. After 90 days, he retrieved the trucks and inspected every stress point under a magnifying glass. The first version had wheels that loosened under extended use. The second had a bed that developed hairline fractures under repeated loading. The third version survived everything. It sold for $7.99 in 1965, roughly $75 today. For 3 consecutive years, 1965, 1966, and 1967, the Mighty Dump was the single best-selling toy in the United States. Not the best-selling toy truck. The best-selling toy across all categories. It outsold Barbie. It outsold every board game. It outsold every other toy vehicle on the market. The effect on the factory and the town went beyond financial figures. The 900 workers of Mound were not anonymous laborers in an anonymous facility. They were craftspeople manufacturing the most popular toy in America, and they knew it. The fathers and mothers who ran the hydraulic presses watched their children play with the same truck they had assembled that week. Final line inspectors developed something that could only be described as a professional pride so deep it sometimes bordered on confrontational. There is a story widely repeated among former Tonka workers about a woman named Helen Nordstrom who in 1961 rejected a batch of 200 trucks because the powder coat tone was slightly off from standard. The batch had been approved by her supervisor. She rejected it anyway. Baker backed her. The entire batch was repainted. By 1970 the numbers said everything clearly. 900 employees. 4 connected buildings on 18 acres. 43 truck models. $47 million in annual revenue. 23% of the American metal toy truck market, or roughly 60% if the category was defined as trucks capable of surviving outdoor use by children. The trucks weighed what they weighed because the men who designed them had never accepted the premise that a toy was something that could be broken. That premise was about to be challenged, not by a better product, but by a cheaper one. In 1971, Baker attended a toy industry conference in New York. A Hasbro executive presented research on the emerging science of child-directed marketing. The data was unambiguous. Children as young as 4 years old could recognize and request specific toy brands by name after seeing television commercials. They could articulate why they wanted a particular toy, and they could exert purchase pressure on their parents that frequently overrode parental judgment about value. The implication was direct. If marketing was directed at children rather than parents, you did not need to justify the product. You needed to generate desire. Baker left the presentation early. He wrote a letter to the Tonka board of directors. It said in part, "We manufacture toys for parents who understand quality. If the industry is moving toward manufacturing toys for children who understand advertising, we are in the wrong business." The board filed the letter and continued expanding production. That letter was the clearest statement of the problem Tonka would never solve. Through the 1970s, the toy industry was separating into 2 economic models, and the separation had nothing to do with product quality. It had everything to do with who was making the purchase decision. Tonka was marketing to parents. Its advertising ran in Life magazine, Reader's Digest, and newspapers. The message always centered on durability and investment. Buy it once and you will not buy it again. Its advertising budget in 1975 was $2.3 million, roughly $13 million today, and 90% was directed at adults. Hasbro was marketing to children. Its commercials ran during Saturday morning cartoons, during the Flintstones, during Scooby-Doo. The message always centered on novelty and desire. New this year, what your friends have, what you saw on television. Its advertising budget in 1975 was $18 million, roughly $100 million today, and 85% was directed at children under 12.